Hello, in this video we're going to talk about patterns. Patterns are type-specific methods and properties that an element might have. For example, a button can do different things than a checkbox, and we're going to talk about a few specific patterns in this video because there are too many to talk about them all. So here I have a small window with a few different elements of different types. And I also have a script that at the moment simply finds this button and invokes it. So we have already talked about the invoke pattern. Invoke can be done if there is only one specific action an element can handle. In the case of a button, we can only click it and nothing else. In the case of a checkbox, we can check it or uncheck it, and it does simply one thing. So this is a fairly simple pattern, and this pattern doesn't have any pattern specific properties available. So if I inspect this element, then we see that the invoke pattern has only invoke available, and if I double click it to try it, then it invokes. So the next one is a checkbox, and the checkbox has the toggle pattern available. So toggle means to check or uncheck, and in this case the toggle method either checks or unchecks it, or we can use the toggle state to either get or set the current status of the checkbox. If I double click on toggle, we see that it gets checked or unchecked, and if we get the toggle state, then we get either 0 or 1 depending on if the element is checked or not. We can also set the element with, for example, to checked or unchecked states. And in this case, in the case of a checkbox, we see that the invoke pattern is also available, so we could also invoke it to check it. So next up is a drop-down list. In the case of a drop-down list, it's a combo box type element, and it has the value pattern, and we can get its value, and we can set its value, and we can expand or collapse the combo box. So let's take a look at this expand collapse pattern first. So let's find a combo box type element, and let's expand it first. Here we see that the combo box was indeed expanded, and we can also get the expand collapse state for it. So here currently it is collapsed, which corresponds to 0. We can also access its value pattern, and we can get the value property like this, and we see that the current selection is select 1, or if I select something else, then the current value changes. I can also try to set the combo box to a desired value. However, I cannot change it without knowing beforehand what items it has available. So in this case, we would need to expand the combo box, and then we would need to get all the associated list items in this drop-down list that appears. And here we get the selection item pattern, which means that we can select these list items here. So if I were to try to automate this, we can find the type button element with the name open, as was for the combo box. So this right here should open, and we need to, of course, invoke it to open it. And then we can find an element type list item, and with name we'll select 1, and we can select that element using the selection pattern. In this case, we see that it was indeed highlighted, but it was not actually clicked. So again, to click it, we can use the invoke pattern, in which case we see that the item was also clicked or actually selected. And if we wanted to get all the list items for this combo box, then we can find all elements of type list item. And now we see that we get all the list items available, and we could filter through these and select the one we want. So the next one is a selection item pattern, which we just saw, but here we can take a little bit closer look. We see that it has the select method. So if I use the select, we see that the item gets selected. And also there is add to selection, which means that if our list box supports selecting multiple items, then we can add the elements to selection as if we were holding down the control key and selecting multiple items. We can also remove from selection or check whether an item is selected or not. So in this case, we could find a list item with name item 3, for example. We can try to select it. We see that the item got selected, or we can remove it from selection, in which case it isn't highlighted anymore. And we can also get the selection state with is selected. And we see that currently it isn't selected, but if I select it, then it is. The next one is an edit type element, which contains text, and we can use the value pattern to get or set the text inside of it. So for example, if I get this edit element and I use the value pattern to get its current value, then we see that we get the exact string that is here. And we can also set the value to, for example, something, and it gets changed. Also, if we wanted to, we can use the set value method instead, which does exactly the same thing. So something else, and it also sets the value. For this edit element, we see that there are also text pattern and text to pattern available. And we're not going to take a look at these right now, but later on in the video. Next up is the slider element, which can be moved around. And the slider has the range value pattern. Range value can give us the current value of this slider, the minimum, the maximum, and also the change sizes. So if we were to move it with the keyboard, how much would it change it? With range value, we can get the value with this value property. Output this value. And we see that we get 52, which seems to be the value indeed. Or we can also set the value to, for example, 10 or 100. We can also get the minimum and the maximum possible range values. In this case, we see that range value has the value property. Then also value pattern had the value property, and also legacy I accessible has a value property. We can differentiate between these if we specify the exact pattern. So in this case, I could use range value pattern and then get the value, in which case it specifically uses the range value pattern. If we use legacy I accessible instead, we get the same value, however using a slightly different method. So legacy I accessible is a predecessor to UIA, an older version, and it is related to the ACC library. We're not going to take a look at this because usually there are better methods available. So the next is an up, down, or a spinner. Here we can change the value of this using the value pattern again. So if I look for this up, down with type edit, then I can get its value, current value 23, and I can set it to something else using the value property. And the next is tab. Tab has a selection pattern again, where we can get the currently selected item. We can select the tab, or we can also use the specific tab items and their selection item patterns to select the specific tab. So in this case, we can try to select the settings tab by using the name settings, and type was tab item, and we can use selection item patterns select to select the settings tab. To get the selected item from this tab element, we can use get selection. So get selection, and this, if we look at the selection pattern, then it retrieves the selected elements in the container. In this case, of course, there can be only one item selected, but it still returns an array of elements. So here we know that we have only one. So we can access the first element of the array and dump it to see what the selection is. And we see that currently the view tab is selected, or the general tab. If we try to put some other number here, then we get an error because only one item is and can be selected. We can't access the item count property because unfortunately UIA viewer shows all the versions of selection pattern at the same time, even though all these might not be supported. So what I mean by this is that there is actually multiple selection patterns available. Selection pattern version 1 and selection pattern version 2. So if we go into the UIA library and find the selection pattern, then we see that the get selection and deselection required and all these are here. And then we get the selection pattern 2. In this case, this element doesn't have selection pattern 2 available. So we cannot use this first selected item or selected item or item count. And if we try to do that, then we get an error. And if we try to check whether selection pattern 2 is available, then we see that it actually isn't available. So we cannot use any of these properties and methods besides this point. Next, let's go back to the edit element and talk about the text range. So the text range can get us additional information about text, whether it's selected, what parts of it are selected, where the selections are located on the screen, and so on. It can't actually change the text itself, we need to use the value pattern to change it. So interacting with the text pattern starts by getting us a text range, which simply represents a part of the text. So for example, from the text pattern, we can get the document range, which represents the whole text inside the element. Or we can get the selection, which returns also a text range for the currently selected text. So for example, using this get selection, we could get what text is currently selected. Let's start from the document range. So document range, we get element document range. So this represents the whole text inside of this. And when we use a method called getText, we can get all the text inside this document range, and it does print all the text. All these text range methods are available here in the Wikipedia. So if you go under chapter 7 patterns, and in the end is text pattern and text range, then text range methods are all listed here. And here we see that we have a get text, and we can also specify a limit to how much of the text we want to get. So for example, only 5 characters. We can also get the currently selected text from this text box. So if I use get selection, then text patterns get selection retrieves us an array of selections, because sometimes in some elements multiple parts of the text can be selected at the same time. In this case, we can only select one part of the text, so we can simply get the first selection. And here we have the selection range, and we can also get all of the text for the selection range. And here we see that only the selected text was output. We can also get the location of the selection or the range. We can use get bounding rectangles to again get all the bounds for the selection or for the text. So if there are multiple lines of text, then this returns multiple bounding rectangles. So let's assign this to a variable, and we want the first line or the first bounding rectangle, and this has x and y properties, which gives us the screen location for the selection. We could actually use mouse move to show it. So let's set the coordinate mode mouse to screen, and let's move to the x and y coordinates. So here we see that it moved to the top left corner of the selection. Okay, we can also get the array range in this case. Get array range is part of text pattern 2. And in this case, we had text pattern 2 available, so we can also use get array range, which returns text range representing the array. So if we got the array range, then if we try to get the text for the array range, then it doesn't return anything because it's only representing the array itself and no text whatsoever. But we could use get bounding rectangles again, get the first one, and for example the x coordinate, in which case it returns us the coordinates of the array. We can also change or modify the text range. We can add text to selection. We can scroll text into view. We can move the endpoints of the selection to one point or another, and we can compare endpoints. So if we wanted to know where the current selection is compared to the document range, then we need to first get both of the ranges. So let's get the document range, and let's get the selection range. And now we need to compare one range's endpoint to another's. So let's compare from the document range using the selection range as a reference or comparison. And we want to compare the start endpoints. So we want to compare the starts of the ranges. So in this case, the start of the selection range would be from the T, and the end would be at G. And for the document range, it would be in the beginning and the end of the text. So if I run this, we see that it returns -4, which means that this document range compared to selection range is 4 characters behind. We can also reverse this to get the positive number. So let's compare the selection range to that document range, and we get 4. So the starting point of the selection in the text is at character 4, and this is indeed correct. Or I can select something else, and now it returns 2. Okay, so from the document range, I can also modify the text range by moving the endpoints. So let's move the starting endpoint forward. So let's use as an endpoint, because text pattern range endpoint, let's move the start point by characters, and let's move it by 4 characters forward. And now I can select the document range. So we see that we moved the document range's endpoint by 4 characters forward and selected the whole range. So in this case, it selected everything from character 4. I could also move it only 1 character forward to select everything besides the first character. Or we can use a different text unit. For example, we can select only the second word. Or we can move the end backwards, so it selects the first word instead. So this is the text range and the text pattern, and we see that it's very powerful in interacting with text and manipulating the selections and getting the coordinates. So in the next video, we're gonna be talking about caching, and then gonna do a few examples of how one would approach programs with UIA. See you in the next video.